Welcome to the Team Teach podcast. I'm Clare, and in each episode you'll find me talking with an expert guest to learn more about behaviour. We squeeze a lot into each episode. You'll listen to the latest thinking in behaviour, continue your professional development with our book recommendation, and then I'll send you away with 3 practical tips you can use in your setting. I'm joined today by Chris Law, and we're talking about responsible risk-taking, which is quite a different topic to what we've had before. Chris, would you mind just telling the listener a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Claire. Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here on this podcast today. So yeah, I'm Chris Law. I'm the head of learning and research for Spaghetti Bridge Schools Group. So Spaghetti Bridge is a group of independent special schools located in the southwest and west of England. And our students are, they all have EHCPs. They're between the ages of 6 to 19. And many of them have had a very negative experience of education. They've been let's say, excluded from their previous school setting. They've had persistent absenteeism rates, school refusal, and things like that. So the work we've been doing at Spaghetti Bridge is about innovating our approach to education and finding out what works for these children, which is kind of an exciting project. And one of the things we find that is really helpful is allowing them to take a few more risks, which may seem paradoxical given the nature of their experience. But we find that it really works.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear more about this. So I did actually share with Chris off air that I'm like, I panic at going on school trips, like I'm risk averse. But I do see the benefits in my service. But I wondered if we could just start with a bit of a reflective question about what you wish you knew then that you know now about this topic.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I started as a PE teacher in San Diego when I was like 21 years old, and I was just kind of winging it, you know. And I guess what I wish I knew was that I thought there was a right way to do things and a right way to teach, and that question just doesn't make any sense to me anymore. You know, we're all different, and we all have different approaches. There's ways that are better, ways that are worse, but I was always worried about getting things wrong. You know. And I think that may have limited maybe my learning mindset and my the way in which I could innovate and do things creatively or try things that maybe didn't work out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So that idea about taking risks or like the fear of making mistakes feels quite heavy, perhaps when we're less experienced. And I suppose linking it back to the topic, that's literally what I guess what we're talking about is the ability to, I guess, do we, maybe I should get you to frame it, because do we mean literally taking more risks? In the way that we framed it in the title is a responsible approach to risk taking, but maybe that's a great starting point. Maybe my sort of like, oh gosh, actually, what is it? Maybe I should get you to define what we mean by that responsible approach to risk.
Yeah, Claire, that's a really good question. I mean, maybe I should start by saying what it isn't. It's not taking safeguarding risks. It's not putting children at risk of harm. You know, like just to be very, very clear up front, that is not what we mean by responsible risk taking. But it does mean that sometimes it's okay to get things wrong. It's okay for things not to work out the way we expected. It's okay to go with the direction the students are taking you in and deviate from your scheme of work. I mean, when I was teaching history, I remember that I would have pages and pages in my schemes of work, just, you know, planning for every eventuality. And it just doesn't work that way if you work with the children. So, I mean, our thinking is informed by the work of Gert Biesta. I don't know if you're familiar with The Beautiful Risk of Education. Yeah, it's a great book. But Biesta says that we've, as a society, tried to make education into almost a machine where there's a certain level of certainty within it. So a student enters the curriculum at a certain age, they, you know, proceed at a certain rate, right? And then they come out, quote unquote, educated, you know, in kind of a mechanistic process. And if we don't achieve those expectations, you know, Biesta says that the system says there's something wrong. But his argument is that humans aren't machines, and that education is about relationships, and it's about looking at possibilities and potentialities and not just inputs and outputs. So we really take that on board at Spaghetti Break.
Hmm.
Not every student's journey is going to be the same. Students will proceed at different paces, that they're each individuals, and that it's really about getting to know themselves while simultaneously being ambitious for each student.
Yeah, so helping students to recognize things in themselves, be able to take maybe some autonomy in choices as well, because I suppose from what you're saying there about everything being a machine, it's almost like the education is done to the student or young person as opposed to kind of with them. And this idea of, taking a few risks, being child, young person led, can really help that child or young person to, yeah, I guess to, grow some autonomy and choices within their education. Is that the kind of lines that
Yeah,
you're
that's
thinking?
exactly it. I mean, we make a contrast between what we call cultures of control and cultures of relationships, and
Yeah.
it's somewhat of a construct because, of course, no school fits into one entirely or the other. But cultures of control are about like hierarchy and authority and consequences and strictly following the scheme of work and the curriculum, whereas cultures of relationships are a little bit about opening up to possibility, being a little bit more child led, seeing where that will take you, and then maybe even most controversially, getting things wrong and saying getting things wrong is not only just okay, but actually is kind of a good thing. And when I talk to new staff or I talk to parents about that, I think that's maybe the most shocking comment we can make. I mean, I've told people we love when kids get things wrong, which sounds strange, but getting things wrong can actually be a much more powerful learning experience than getting things right, if that
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I work one to one with children on the autistic spectrum or autistic kids, and I do some therapeutic work. And I that bit about getting things wrong. So there's one person that I've worked with in the past, and we can now kind of celebrate those moments that they've got wrong, and actually even like laugh about it. It's like this learning experience of, God, gosh, like look where you were, and when that happened, and look where you are now. But in that kind of safe and supportive environment where it's absolutely okay to make those mistakes, kind of in inverted commas, and it's actually genuinely really helped them to be able to reflect back and then see change. But my sense is that if we don't give the opportunities for mistakes to happen, and again, that responsible risk taking, like it's a risk sometimes as well, like pointing out when things have gone wrong. For some of the kids I work with, it, risky in the sense of someone lashing out or, putting, too much onto someone. But it really, I can see how that can make such a difference to, the young people. And I wondered if that's the same with staff, Chris. Like how hard. So for the young people, I think kind of, talking about mistakes and kind of as a learning opportunity, I find that comes quite naturally. But I'm wondering, like that shift with staff, because perhaps staff can maybe find that tricky, that reflective practice at points.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of different points there. I
Mm.
think that a lot of our students have had an experience of school where they're constantly being told that they've gotten things wrong, and
Yeah.
that and because of that, maybe they're not a good student, or maybe that they're
Hmm.
not achieving like there's expectations that they should, right? So a lot of our students have developed a real fear, a real anxiety around getting the wrong answer, and that can really be detrimental to their ability to
Yeah.
engage with
Yeah.
education. But you're absolutely right, Claire. I mean, staff have the same difficulty of saying, I got that wrong. I mean, my
Mhm.
favorite story, I had a student on assessment and he was quizzing me. He loved animals, right? And so one of the questions he asked me was, is a scorpion an arachnid? Right. And I was like, absolutely not, because it's got 6 legs and 2 pinchers, and arachnids have 8 legs. And he goes, you're wrong. Guess what? The pinchers are actually legs and it's considered an arachnid. And I go, that's awesome. I love being wrong. And he just
Mhm.
stopped and looked at me and was like, wait, what? I'm like, I love getting stuff wrong because now I've learned something new. And you could literally see this 12-year-old had never had anybody tell him before getting stuff wrong is okay. And that was just shocking to him. So,
Yeah.
but that ability for me to go, yeah, I didn't know that. that didn't work out the way that I thought it would. Let's find out why, is a really powerful moment for our students. I do think that we've created this strange wall between the world and school. Like, this isn't going to come as a shock to you, Claire, that things go wrong in the world, right? Things don't always work out the way we plan for them to. And I hate to say it, but if they did, things would be kind of boring, right? And we're probably not taking enough risks if everything is going exactly as we had planned, So, but I don't see where we're building this into the heart of the way we work with children, and that's something that we're really trying to rethink.
Yeah, that rethinking, like, traditional values and approaches to education. I can't get that idea of it being a machine out my head, and that's probably going to stay with me. And it is, I mean, that's part of the reason why I think in special needs and away from mainstream, maybe you have more flexibility um, to be able to go. I don't want to say off piece, but going back to the topic of the podcast, to like take some risks in in what you're doing, with that more personalized approach. Did you know that you can become a trainer and deliver Team Teach training to staff within your own organisation? Have the flexibility to choose when, where and who you deliver your training to throughout the year. Find out more about this cost-effective option on the Team Teach website. I'm wondering kind of when this vision got implemented in your service, and whether you had to do like a culture shift, or was it already embedded? Because I know that can make a difference.
Well, Claire, if I could start with that first insight, we do believe that the special education sector can be kind of an innovation and incubation think tank that then could provide examples for more mainstream schools. I mean, we don't have to work to the national curriculum. We don't necessarily have to work to age-related expectations. So this allows us to really do things that are a little bit different and a little bit more interesting at times. And like I said, because the more traditional approach clearly hasn't been working for our students, this necessitates us to do something different. But you're absolutely right in the sense that staff coming in and being told it's okay to get things wrong, it's okay to be child-led, right? It's okay to open yourself up to possibilities of things not going the way you had planned, can be a real culture shift. So we actually, for all of our staff, they, as part of their induction, engage in what we call as our fundamentals course, where they actually have to do a project themselves. So we have a project-based approach where it's called enterprise learning, and our students need to, the projects are the vehicle for their learning. So that's the kind of focal point of what they're doing. So we have staff do the same thing. And if I could tell you the story, the first time I did this, we had our staff group together and I said, okay, we're going to reveal the project. You're going to make a website, in groups together, you're going to make a website based on this topic, and staff literally said, no, I won't. I don't know how to make a website. Like, what does a good website look like? They got a little bit panicky, and that's because I think that they were being asked to step outside of their comfort zone and do something which they weren't familiar with, which is something that we ask our students to do every day. But the second part is that then they said, okay, well, tell us what you want it to look like. They were asking me what sort of answer I expected. And I said, I don't know, right? We're going to look at good examples of websites. You're going to create a model, right? And you're going to do it yourself, and then you're going to present it, but there's no right website, right? Does that make sense? There's no right way to make it. There's websites that maybe don't work as well. And this is maybe our next innovation or controversial statement. What if instead of looking at right versus wrong, we looked at what works and what maybe doesn't work? If that makes sense, I mean, right and wrong are so limiting, you're either right or you're wrong. But if we say, actually, that website kind of works on some levels, it kind of conveys its message and, serves its purpose, but it could be a little bit better. That opens us up to all kinds of possibilities. So the idea is that we really ask our staff to say, instead of saying like, the result of this project needs to be X, right? That there's a way of creating something which maybe fits the purpose of, or the intention behind it, solves the problem in a better or less than better way than, as opposed to there's a right way to do it. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it does totally, but partly I think that I don't teach now, but I used to teach English, and there's never a wrong answer in English, because as long as you can back up what you're saying, like, you go for it. So it really resonates with me, this idea of being able to contribute, and there isn't a right way. There genuinely isn't a right way of doing it. It's kind of your perception and kind of how you conceptualize it, and how you articulate it. And I think that in creative subjects, there's maybe the license to do that more. But I really like how you're framing this now, that that's like across the board. And of course, in maths, there is going to be like a right and wrong answer.
Well,
But
kind of,
different
but I could.
working out, different ways of getting to it, maybe.
Well, no, exactly, exactly. I mean, like, so maths, and we talk about creative subjects versus not creative. Maths is very creative, right? But it
Oh
depends on
yeah.
how you approach it.
Yeah.
So one of the things we do is we try to replace the word is with could.
Uh-huh.
So a good example is if 1 + 1 equals is 2, right? That's a very closed question, and it's true. But what if we replace that is with a could? 1 + 1 could equal 2. What else could it equal? Right? Now, that makes a lot of people uncomfortable because they've been taught that there's a direct 1 + 1 = 2.
Uh-huh.
But what if it was binary? 1 + 1 = 10. Or what if it was 2 buckets of water and you combine them together? 1 + 1 = 1. So introducing that possibility and that openness, even to a subject like math, can you find 5 ways of getting this problem wrong? Right? That brings that creativity and that kind of deep learning into a subject and makes it more interesting than just, tell me the answer that I told you was right 5 minutes ago type thing. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't introduce those knowledge frameworks. We definitely do that. And
Yeah,
there
yeah.
are things like this is a plus sign, 1 + 1 does equal 1 if we're using these systems. But what I'm saying is that isn't quite enough, if that makes sense, But the issue I think we have sometimes is that we're bringing our own preconceptions of
Mm.
1 + 1 is 2, right? As opposed to being open when the kids go, well, I think 1 + 1 = 100. And you say, can you explain to me why you think that? As opposed to just going, no, that's wrong, you
Mm.
know? And that's a very different approach, I'd say, because maybe they have a great reason for thinking that.
Yeah, and I guess it makes me think about kind of problem solving and life skills a bit as well, particularly when we're talking about maths, for example, here, is that when you do have a problem, if you're looking and able to open up people's minds to the possibility of lots of different ways of kind of getting to the same thing, that feels like a really important life skill. And I know that we can get stuck in the binary, using like a maths pun in what I'm saying, but we can get really stuck in it. But I find that the children in my service that certainly really start to prosper in kind of what they're doing outside of the schools are the ones that can look at lots of kind of grey areas. And I think that's kind of where we're going with this responsible risk taking, that you're opening up different eventualities for the kids to look at the same thing but see it in different from different perspectives.
Yeah, and for us to go with them as opposed
Mm,
to, staying and saying, "Well, that's not where I expected this to go," if that
yeah.
makes sense. I mean, Claire, I can tell that you're English teacher because this is the way it's taught. I taught history for years.
Okay,
There's
yeah.
trust me, there are very few definitives in history. There are things that just aren't true, right? But then when you get to wider explanations, right, you need to be really open to the student saying, "Well, I found this piece of evidence and it says this thing,"
Yeah. Yeah.
But sometimes I wonder with our students if we're having it, when we get caught up in this right wrong dichotomy, when we're not actually open to them, kind of diverting the session, sometimes we miss what they're actually saying. So, I mean, a
Mm,
good example is like, let's say a biology session. We had, I'm green, I live in trees, and I'm poisonous. And, as our question, and the student says, I'm a polar bear, right? And you're like, wait,
hmm.
the one answer would be, well, no, you're not, right? But the more interesting approach is to say, well, wait, why are you a polar bear? And there could be a knowledge gap. Maybe they don't know that polar bears aren't green and live in trees, right? But there could be that actually they think it's really funny. Oh, I thought it would be really funny, a green polar bear living in a tree. Isn't that funny? So what I'm saying is that right wrong paradigm, right, doesn't get you to the thinking that the student has engaged in, right, which will allow you then to find out where that gap really is. Okay, that is really funny. You know, I pulled a green polar bear in a tree, but let's come up with a real world example. How about that? Is that cool? Right? Oh, okay, good. You know, so once again, though, you're going with the student, you're taking a chance that they're going to come up with some very, very interesting answers, but then you're guiding them back towards maybe the direction that you want to head them into, you know. But I think that can be, when we're talking about risk taking, that can be a little bit scary for a teacher because you don't know where
Yeah.
you're going to end up. And if I can be honest, I think that a lot of teachers are under a lot of pressure to cover the curriculum. And so
Yeah.
taking these deviations, they're always worried they're not going to get to the end of that particular learning outcome for that session, you know. So and that's a systemic issue. I think that there is a
Yeah.
little bit of a pressure to cover the curriculum as opposed to finding those deep learning opportunities and really going with students on them.
And that is hard when it is so systemic and there's so many pressures. And I mean, for me personally, I think that is why I ended up working in pupil referral units and special needs, like health hospitals, because I felt that I could be more or even more creative with the curriculum. And yeah, it is hard with the systemic pressures, but I still feel like the opportunities for what we're talking about, maybe albeit on a slightly smaller scale, but even the way that you're kind of interacting with questions, like you can move that back towards the curriculum to hit the goals. And I used to say this when I worked with kind of newly qualified teachers or early career teachers, where there are so many different ways to present that curriculum to the kids and still come back to the same place. And I guess we're coming full circle because that's what we're saying that helps the children and young people by not saying yes or no and by thinking about the thought processes and how to do things. It's helpful and you come up with kind of creative ways of doing things. And I feel as a practitioner, it's the same set of skills, isn't it, of being a bit brave with it as well. But I know that's hard. I'm kind of feeling guilty even saying that with the pressures and things at the moment, but I do. I always thought, even in mainstream, that I could put my kind of spin on it, which was very much in the vein of kind of what you were saying there, Chris, of trying to be student led, going with those conversations that still get you to the point and they get you to the curriculum, but you just, it's about, I do think there's a bit of braveness in it.
Well, so we talk about, you know, cultures of relationships, that applies to staff as well.
Mm,
Like, what I worry is that, you know, we need to trust staff to be brave
yeah.
and to enable them to feel safe to take a chance and maybe not get exactly where they thought to at the end of the session, and maybe even reward that bravery. I mean, this is where kind of our standards led, you know. So what if we had a standard that said that actually responsible risk taking in curriculum
Yeah.
pedagogical innovation was part of the high quality teaching, you know.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
so I think that would help teachers to feel safe to take these chances, you know, to follow the students, to guide them back maybe to where they want to go. But without that kind of larger cultural framework, I think that a lot of teachers feel unsafe doing that. I mean, I hate to speak for large groups of people, but I mean, this is just from talking to colleagues. I hear a lot of this, but even more so when we come to behavior,
Mm,
because, you know, many of our students have difficulties regulating their emotions, and they have traumatic experiences both inside and outside of school, and this
mm,
manifests in externalizing behaviors. You know, so part of that culture of relationships is about actually taking a let's say a learning approach as opposed to a punitive approach to
mhm,
behavior.
mhm.
So, I mean, an example I have of this is that, you know, I was teaching in a mainstream school and one of my students didn't show up for the first 2 weeks of class. We knew that, you know, everything. Then she showed up one day. Now I have an option here. She knows she should have been there. I know she should have been there, right? So I could have gone up and said, "Where have you been? You're in big trouble." Okay.
Mhm.
Instead, I said, "I am so glad you're here. Why couldn't you make it for the past 2 weeks?" Right? And she, of course, said, "Well, I couldn't find the classroom." And I go, "Great. Well, you know where it is now, so you can be here every day. This is awesome. If there's any more problems, let me know." Okay. But by taking that risk of not saying you're in trouble for this, right? And saying instead, I'm just glad that you're here, and now we can really start learning. Then we built that relationship, and she just attended from that point on. But that is me as a teacher taking a big chance of saying that, I'm not going to say, well, now you're going to suspension or so, whatever it was. This is in America. And really being innovative in my relational approach with that student. So I think we could do this more in kind of investigating where the behaviors are coming from and how we can build relationships while maintaining expectations, if that makes sense. I worry that people think that building relationships leads to lower expectations. I think it leads to higher expectations.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think you're still maintaining a boundary there. The expectation is that you're going to be in now, and I'm coming from a position of care, first and foremost. So I think that it's not about lowering expectations. It is about, like you've just said, like keeping that boundary there, but it's just a different way of approaching it, and empathetic, all of those things.
But imagine that she didn't show up to the next session. That meant that my approach of building that sense of belonging wasn't working. I need to try something else.
Yeah.
But if I get in trouble for doing that, then the next time I'm just going to follow the line and say, we're going to use punitive measures, So, and that's that culture of saying, you tried something with the best of intentions. It didn't work. Let's try something else to engage that student.
And that's okay. Yeah. It's been fascinating, Chris. Like, I've really enjoyed, hearing about this innovative approach, and it's all really come together in my head, and I'm going to be left with the idea of working in a machine. Anyway, could you just finish off the episode just with 3 top tips for the listener?
Yeah, I could. I mean, like, I've got to start with getting things wrong is okay, or maybe getting things wrong is better than okay, or maybe getting things wrong is actually an incredible learning opportunity, So better than getting things right at times. So that, number one. Number two is putting trusting and responsible relationships back at the heart of education, and no two relationships look the same. So that's where that kind of that risk, that professional vulnerability, that trying new tactics, is really, really effective in reconnecting students who maybe haven't had that experience before. And I guess the third thing would be about creating cultures of safety, cultures of relationships within the schools while maintaining those high standards. I think that we can confuse sometimes high expectations with I'd say more punitive approaches, right? Whereas high expectations can be led through cultures of trust, cultures of relationship, cultures of shared values in potentially a more effective way.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Chris. There's loads for the listener to take away from the episode today. And thanks for coming on, and I hope to catch up with you soon.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to the Team Teach podcast. It's been great to have you here with us as we discuss behaviour, communication, and the ways we can best support those in our care. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.